everybody. Welcome to Zone Defense. Today I got Chris with me, and we're going to go over the Carson Wentz trade that happened just a few hours ago. For those of you that might have missed it, the Philadelphia Eagles traded quarterback Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts for a third-round pick and a conditional second-round pick. Chris, what did you think about this deal?
Yeah, obviously the return for Carson Wentz, it probably wasn't as much as the Eagles wanted in this deal. That's why it's not super interesting to break down the whole trade as a whole. It's a third rounder, which it's a decent pick. It's a day 2 pick. They'll get a decent player out of that. And then I know if Carson Wentz plays, I believe it's 75% of the snaps at quarterback. I believe that second rounder turns into a first rounder, and or if he plays 70% and they make the playoffs. So a couple situations here that make the trade a little bit better for the Eagles. And I believe he will, barring an injury, play that 75%. Obviously, I'm assuming he's going to be their full-time starter next year. So most likely it'll be a 2022 late first-round pick is my assumption. I think for this deal, I think the biggest winner here is Carson Wentz, obviously. He got a starting job. When there seemed to be no place for him, he found a home in Indianapolis. I know he was really didn't want to go to the Bears, which I for some reason, it doesn't really make any sense to me. He didn't want to go there. I feel like he should have. Obviously it worked out for him, but at the same time, like he shouldn't have been so picky about his destination because he just needs a starting job again, a second chance per se. But he's going to a good organization, going back to Frank Reich, which I think is a big narrative street in the offseason for the team, that somehow that he's going to have a massive turnaround next year, which I think is a possibility. There's also obviously risks to bringing him on with his injury history. Obviously, getting benched for a rookie doesn't look great on the resume either. So there's definitely. I think the trade for the Colts, it's a risk that it's smart for them to take because their win now window is here. I think he's an upgrade from Phillip Rivers last year, in my opinion, still. And I think they'll be a playoff team again. That's pretty much all I have to say on their side. Drew, got any differing thoughts?
No, I don't completely understand why he didn't want to go to Chicago. I feel like the Colts are definitely a better team than the Bears, but they're both very similar teams. Maybe Wentz knows something about Allen Robinson not coming back, or some other moves that maybe the front office is planning on making. But if you look at both the teams, like Indianapolis has a better defense than Chicago, but Chicago's defense is also really good. And both teams offensively had weapons all around. They just needed a quarterback. So don't completely understand why he wanted to go to Indiana, or why he didn't want to go to Chicago. I do understand though why he wanted to go to Indianapolis, because obviously they have Frank Reich as their head coach. He was the offensive coordinator for the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl. And that was also the season that Wentz was an MVP candidate, hands down his best season in the NFL. So I do expect, even though personally I might not be the biggest fan of Carson Wentz or how he handled the situation or all of the leadership issues that he reportedly has, his entitlement issues, all this stuff going on with Carson Wentz, I might not like that. But objectively speaking, I think Wentz is going to have a really nice season. As long as he stays healthy, injuries are still a concern with Wentz. But he's paired back up with Frank Reich. He's in a really, really great situation. The Colts, like you said, they're giving up a couple picks. It doesn't really matter. We'll talk about the Eagles side in a second. But for the Colts, it's a really low risk, high reward situation, because Wentz could be the MVP candidate again. And the Colts, we saw it there. The Bills made it the AFC Championship game, and the Colts were a Hail Mary away from winning and going on to the second round. So this is a good team that I think got better because Wentz is an upgrade over Rivers. And I think right now I would say they're probably the AFC South favorites, hands down. I think they're better than the Titans too. Never mind, forgot about the Titans. Titans are right there too, depending on if they get J.J. Watt and that thing. But I think it's gonna be really, really close, like we saw this year in Titans and the Colts. But I'll jump in now to the Eagles side of things. This is pretty embarrassing, I would say, for the most part, just because a few weeks ago they said they wanted a Stafford-like deal. And for those of you that might not have remembered, the Lions traded Matthew Stafford to the Rams, just Stafford, and the Lions in return got 2 first-round picks, one coming next year, another one coming the year after that, and then they got a third-round pick for this year. along with Jared Goff, who obviously is a very controversial quarterback, but there's still some upside there, regardless of the contract. And all the Colts or all the Eagles got, excuse me, was a conditional second round pick, which could turn into a first round pick down the line and a third round pick and nothing else. So that's a bit embarrassing for the Eagles. And I think I also saw a tweet. It was like June 2019. It was a picture of like Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz, and it was like, we're just getting started. And now they're both gone. About a year and a half after that tweet? So not great. But now I feel like it does. We talked about it in our coaches episode about Nick Sirianni and how he was in a really tough situation. It makes his situation a little bit easier. Now they have a clear cut number one guy in Jalen Hurts. Hopefully, there are some rumors that maybe they go after another guy in the draft, which I think would be catastrophic, and they just be running everything back. But now you got a clear guy in Hurts. There's some pieces there. I still don't love the team that much, but at least you got this Wentz headache out of the way, and it seems like the team at least likes Hurts a lot more, likes to rally around Hurts a little bit more. So hopefully in that regard, the Eagles win, even though the return for Wentz obviously wasn't great. And I think also you mentioned it before we started recording, Chris. I think it's the largest cap hit ever for a team. So that's also not great. But I think it might be, in the long run, might be worth it getting the whole headache and situation of Wentz out of the building, and maybe it'll work out for them. But it is definitely a black eye right now. But what did you think of it?
Yeah, so I mean, for the Eagles side, it's nice that they traded him away and got something for him at least. Obviously, the 2 first rounders or whatever that they were asking for was way too unreasonable, and this return seems a lot more, down to earth. I don't think it's a terrible trade for the Eagles. I mean, this is a big, huge contract that I know it's a huge dead cap hit. I think it broke the record for most dead cap, over $33 million for that. But it's still good. They got off of him. They got off the contract now. In my opinion, I think Jalen Hurts should be the unquestioned signal caller going into next year. But I also think they should not go without next year without adding at least one other high-end backup quarterback. And I think, a really interesting name to throw out there. Well, I mean, one would be Jameis Winston, but he could just go right back to the Saints. I think that one's really interesting, having him as a nice backup. And then 2, I think and this one makes a lot more sense to me, is Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think that one would be extremely interesting for them. They could probably get him for pretty cheap. He's obviously shown flashes of extreme talent, and if Hurts gets hurt, no pun intended, or just flat out struggles like he did in his last start, at least when they benched him, I think Fitzpatrick come in and give them a chance to win the game. And for the Eagles, like, I mean, they're a few years removed from a Super Bowl. They've made the playoffs 3 years in a row. So I mean, this isn't a team that I'm totally just out on. They had a ton of injuries last year. They've got some players to get rid of, but they added Darius Slay in the offseason. He was kind of banged up throughout the year. Their offensive line was basically just in shambles starting in week 1. Also, their defense had a lot of injuries or weapons. I think with that 6th pick, they would be really smart to draft a wide receiver at 6, Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, either one, or go defense as well, one of those 2 things, and then also try to make a couple shrewd moves in the offseason to, shore up their depth a little bit, whether it's adding another receiver, another running back, somebody on the defensive line, just some added pieces of this team. And I think they can be competitive in a division that I believe is still wide open because, Dak may not return. Who knows with the Washington football team, where they'll be at. Maybe they'll have Deshaun Watson. We'll be doing another update video in a week. That's a possibility. And then the Giants are the Giants. So I think this division is still totally wide open. And I think, having Hurts, I mean, he's been a winner throughout his whole career. I mean, he definitely showed promise to start last year or in his 4 games last year. It's not a big sample size. Obviously, he can either just fall apart or explode next year. But I think he showed enough flashes to win the starting job in opening day of next season, in my opinion.
Yeah, and for as embarrassing as the situation is, and you've mentioned it there, they won the Super Bowl, 3 years ago now, and to go from having that, a young up and coming quarterback, Peterson's not young, but he was an up and coming coach. It looked like he was going to be a Philadelphia lifer, and then just 3 years later to have that all blow up in their face, and then for the Wentz that you gave him the huge contract, and all you get in return is just a couple minor draft picks. It doesn't look great, but like you said, it is. In a weird way, it's nice that they're able to close that book and they don't have that distraction, at least that distraction anymore. And it gives Sirianni, it gives Hurts for the most part. I know he played the end of last year, but for the most part, he wasn't there when they won the Super Bowl. He gets a clean slate too. They have some draft flexibility, like you said. Maybe they bring some guys in, like a Ryan Fitzpatrick, maybe some other guys too, and they can just start fresh. And I think that's what this team needs. And it's not NFC East. We talked about it all year last season. It's not a great division. Depending on what the Cowboys do. I mean, it's right now where it stands. I mean, I think maybe the Washington football team, if they get a quarterback, they might be who I'm picking to win the division right now as it stands today. And I think the Cowboys are probably my second team in that division, assuming they get Dak back. But if they don't get Dak back, no, I'm rhyming now, no pun. Um, I think the Eagles are probably the second best team there too, and I think they're clearly better than the Giants, I would say. But that's also they get Barkley back. There's a lot of uncertainty for all four of those teams in the
Yep.
division. And I think overall, though, trade. People are making fun of it. We made fun of it a little bit for what they got in return, and at least especially compared to what they were expecting to get in return, like a Stafford-like deal, like I mentioned at the top. It is a little bit embarrassing in that regard, but at the same time, it's nice they get to start fresh and go into 2021 without the distraction that is Carson Wentz. But yeah, do you have anything else to add about either team, or did you? I know you had some fantasy takes you wanted to get to too.
Yeah, I just want to address some fantasy takes here. Not really anything else to say about either side of the deal. Obviously, we'll have big implications for both these teams going into the offseason, what they end up doing. But we'll start with the Colts side for fantasy wise. Obviously Carson Wentz, an upgrade, especially in a dynasty format where you didn't think you had a starting quarterback anymore. You now do, and I would say a pretty good one now. I mean, their weapons aren't insane as of right now, but they didn't have to give up their first round pick. I expect them to add another weapon, whether it's a tight end, a wide receiver, something like that. He's got Jonathan Taylor, Naeem Hines out of the backfield. I would say Hines gets a downgrade in terms of any value because Wentz isn't the greatest at checking it down. I don't think he's going to do it quite as much. Jonathan Taylor, pretty much about the same. There may be a couple more red zone opportunities for him. I think Pittman gets a pretty decently sized upgrade here, though. Hilton's going to be an unrestricted free agent. I don't expect him to return this year. Pittman could be the number one receiver there in Indy. And Carson Wentz has had success with a guy like him before. Alshon Jeffrey, I would say, that bigger bodied receiver. I think they have a similar. I think Pittman is a little bit more versatile than Jeffrey was, but they have a similar kind of body type and stuff. So he's got the prototype for being a number one receiver. I think Pittman could be an absolute steal in drafts come next season. And then another guy that I think it could be an interesting pick if they don't really add anybody would be Jack Doyle as well. Not a fun pick at all. A really gross tight end, but in a landscape full of gross tight ends, he could be somewhat interesting going into next year. What do you think about the Colts skill position players and then Carson Wentz as well?
I think Wentz is you specified for dynasty. So for those that have dynasty, him and dynasty are probably really happy right now because, like I said before, we're talking about the more real life football. He's in a great situation, and he's with Frank Reich again, who reportedly really likes him despite the other concerns that have plagued Wentz throughout his career. And I think he's in literally the perfect position he can find himself in. I think Wentz is going to have a really big year, both for dynasty but also for redrafts. Wentz is getting a little bit of buzz here. So you might have to take him a little bit earlier than you would have otherwise. But I still think he's not going to be the top quarterback off the board. I think you could probably wait if you're one of those guys that I like to do it. I know Chris, you like to do it where you wait to draft the quarterback until later in the fantasy draft. If you're one of those guys, I think Wentz is a really nice pick there. And you could put him as your QB1, and you could expect he could be like an Aaron Rodgers like guy from last season, who I think I got in like the 20th round or something of our draft, and he obviously was he was like a third best quarterback in all of fantasy. So I could see something like that happening for Wentz. And everything else, I don't really have anything else to add because you touched on it, and I agree with all your takes there. JT, nothing changes too much for the backfield. Pittman Jr., I think he was going to get a boost regardless of who was quarterback, as long as they didn't sign some like crap guy, because of you mentioned it there, the loss of T.Y. Hilton, most likely. And even if they do bring Hilton back, I still think Pittman's going to be the number one guy in his second year on the team. So yeah, I agree with all their takes there. I don't really have too much to add in regards to Indy. I'll hop over to Philadelphia because I think it's the same thing. We kind of saw this offense before under Hurts. So I think Miles Sanders, I think, is going to be a good maybe bounce back fantasy candidate. Jalen Hurts too, for dynasty reasons, for the same reason as Wentz. Now that uncertainty's now gone for Philadelphia, now Hurts is your clear cut quarterback one, and very similar to Wentz in redraft leagues. I think you could take Hurts later in drafts, and you could. I think there's a little more risk there because we don't know for certain how good he's going to work under Sirianni. However, he still has the upside to be a really good guy. We saw him last year down the stretch. He was a really solid fantasy quarterback option. So I think the same thing with Hurts goes if you're drafting quarterbacks, like he's a really, really nice option. But yeah, I think Jalen Reagor too. I think he's another solid second year post hype sleeper candidate you could take on the Eagles because I mean it's their receiving core is. It sounds like Ertz is probably going to get traded too at some point. Alshon Jeffrey, who knows there? Deshaun Jackson, who knows there? A lot of uncertainty there. I think Jalen Reagor could have a really nice season, unless, depending on what they do in the draft. I know you mentioned some other guys they might go after wide receivers, but yeah, I think Jalen Reagor is a really good post-hype sleeper candidate, and I think Sanders, same thing. He could be a solid RB2 option that could evolve into an RB1 depending on where you draft him. But what do you think about the Eagles side of things for fantasy?
Yeah, so not a lot of different thoughts from me on the Eagles side. Personally, I will be absolutely all in on Jalen Hurts if he is their starting quarterback going into next year. He will be my favorite quarterback because I know he will go pretty late in drafts, similar to, because you said similarly to where you got Aaron Rodgers. I took Josh Allen in the 9th round. If Jalen Hurts is in the 9th round, I'm absolutely smashing that draft button. I think he'll be around that range. So, I mean, maybe I'm
Yeah.
putting a little bit of a target on my back for any league mates that know that I now really want him, but he's going to be an absolutely one of my top candidates to take as one of my late round quarterback options because I think his rushing upside is absolutely absurd. Obviously, there's some uncertainty, which I think will keep his draft stock a little bit lower with the coaching change, with the weapons. I'm starting to talk myself more into them going after that wide receiver at 6 even more after kind of thinking about, they're not going to have Ertz anymore, most likely. Jeffrey's probably going to be gone. Deshaun Jackson most likely won't be back either. I mean, that's a lot of holes to fill, and they don't have a lot of cap space to do it either. And I don't think they're going to go into this year with the same receiving core as they had last year. But so I'm almost willing to talk myself, and I do have Jalen Hurts in a dynasty, so it definitely helps me a little bit. But talking myself into them going after Devontae Smith if he's there at the 6th spot, I think that makes a lot of sense for him as a player and what they need on the skill set. Because like you said, Reagor. I think he's still got a lot of talent. Personally, I think he can bounce back this year after an injury-plagued rookie year. I think Dallas Goedert is also really interesting this year, especially if Ertz is gone. I think he could be a potential breakout tight end in that top 5 range potentially because he showed some definite chemistry with Jalen Hurts over the stretch there. And I think if they don't end up adding any receivers and they still have Hurts at quarterback, I think guys like Travis Fulgham and Greg Ward will be interesting. But I am almost willing to guarantee they either trade for an Allen Robinson. I think that would make a lot of sense as well, trading for Allen Robinson. A Kenny Galladay would make some sense. They don't have a ton of cap space, but they can use that tag and trade or whatever, or drafting a guy like Jamar Chase, a guy like Devontae Smith. So I think all that makes for an interesting offense next year. I think it makes Hurts really interesting. And then Miles Sanders, I think it's a minor downgrade for him personally, just because Hurts takes away some of those red zone touchdowns.
Yeah, that's true.
But at the same time, I think if Hurts can move the offense better than Wentz did this year, which he definitely showed that he could do, I think Sanders RB2. I agree with your assessment of him being an RB2, and then someone that could potentially sneak into the RB1 range if everything goes right.
Yeah, I agree with all those takes. It's just going to be interesting to see what they do from now on with free agency and the draft, because like you said, there's going to be a lot of fantasy implications that would impact Goddard if they keep Ertz or trade Ertz, or Reagor if he's there somehow their wide receiver 1 or if he's more their wide receiver 3. It's hard to exactly predict because we obviously don't know yet for fantasy purposes. But as it stands right now, it seems like the guys Reagor, Goddard, Sanders, and then obviously Hurts too on the Eagles side of things are all going to have good seasons. Colts, I feel like it's a little more clear. I think Wentz is going to be good. Pittman's going to be good. JT is going to still be a solid RB2 with RB1 upside. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it for this episode. Do you have anything else you want to add on the trade or fantasy or anything like that?
No, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if yet again, another quarterback getting traded. And actually, I saw a stat from 2009 to 2016. There isn't a single quarterback that was drafted that's on their original team that they were drafted by, which is kind of insane to me, man. I mean, that's a really long range of years. So, just an interesting stat I saw basically right now that I saw it on Twitter.
Yeah, well, because I'm thinking about what you got, like the Andrew Luck RG3 draft. I think. Wait, Russell Wilson though. Russell Wilson was drafted in that range.
Okay, so that was definitely wrong then.
That was a wrong. Yeah, I was thinking. I was like, wait a minute. But yeah, it's probably because I know like Stafford, Jared Goff. Obviously, they both switched teams this season. And then you got that one draft where it was like Blaine Gabbert and Christian Ponder and a bunch of other crap quarterbacks. So I think Jimmy Clausen might have been in there, Notre Dame college football guy. A lot of busts there, and Cam Newton too. Obviously, just switched teams not too long ago as well. But yeah, unless if you have nothing else to add, I'm glad we got that little fun fact there in at the end. But yeah, so once again, we are the Zone Defense Podcast. We have plenty of off-season content. We actually did another NFL episode yesterday on the coaching hires. We do talk about Carson Wentz, but we recorded it before this episode. So we talk about his potential landing spots. But obviously, we didn't know he was ending up on the Colts. We did say very similar things, though, I will say, about if he went to the Colts. But yeah, still check out that episode. We mainly talk about the different coaching hires and our thoughts on each one. So still a lot of really great information in that episode. We're also planning on doing a bunch of NFL draft coverage, free agency and trade news, as well as previews for the 2021 season. And then Chris and I are also continuing our weekly Zone Defense basketball hours. So check those out. Subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and search us on Apple Podcasts. Smash that like button and drop a comment down below. Let us know your thoughts about the deal. Did you think the Colts win? Do you think the Eagles win? What are your expectations, either fantasy or real life, for each team as we enter 2021? But that'll be it for this episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.